Hey, what's going on, guys? The Horror Man back with the next Top 20 for 2020. This time I'll be counting down my top 20 favorite 2010 through 2019 horror films. If you're not familiar with the Top 20 for 2020, it's a series my buddy Jason and I created. So far, we've done a top 20 for 2020 of zombie films. We counted down our top 20 favorite 80s slasher films. And last time we ranked our top 20 favorite killer animal films. This time around, the theme selected was 2010 through 2019 horror films. So basically, we will be ranking our top 20 favorite horror films from the last decade. This list can only include horror films released in the years 2010 through 2019. There are other rules as well that Jason and I created for this series. First of all, we can only include one movie per franchise. Second, there are no honorable mentions. We will only feature 20 films and 20 films only. And finally, only movies we own on physical media can be considered. If we can't show a copy of the film from our collection, then we cannot include it in our ranking. For me, this list was the most difficult to compile so far. There were just so many horror films released from 2010 through 2019. I narrowed it down to about 25, and then I had to cut it down to 20. It wasn't easy. But I did it, and I think I'm satisfied with the final list. I figured I better film this video before I change my mind again. As always, please keep in mind this is just my personal opinion. And also realize that I haven't seen every single movie. So just because you don't see a movie included in my ranking, doesn't mean it's because I don't like it. Maybe it's because I just haven't seen it yet. I also do not like to spend too much time talking about each of the films on the list, because I don't like the videos to get too long. I will start with my least favorite, number 20, and work my way to number 1, my favorite horror film of the last decade. And so, here we go. My top 20 for 2020 of my top 20 favorite 2010 through 2019 horror films. Coming in at number 20 is Hellfest. I originally thought this might be higher because I was sort of blown away by this when I first watched it. Upon rewatching it, I realized it's just a standard slasher, maybe above average, I guess. But what really puts this one above the rest for me is the ending. So take away that ending and it's just your average slasher film. But with that ending, it definitely has the potential to become a slasher franchise. And because of that, I had to include it in my top 20. At number 19 is the only Final Destination film to be released in the decade. It's Final Destination 5, and it just so happens to be my favorite of all the Final Destination films. Why is that? Because this one has more of a slasher aspect than the rest of them. Yes, I know all of the Final Destination films follow that slasher film formula, but this one literally has a character killing others in slasher fashion. Not only that, but it has one of the greatest twist endings I've ever seen. It completely blew me away the first time I watched it, and this movie is so rewatchable. Final Destination 5 is my number 19 in my top 20. I know I'll get some heat for this, but my number 18 pick is The Lords of Salem. It's moody and atmospheric, and it's an incredible slow burn. I know a lot of people find it boring, but I don't at all. I love this movie, and I love the fact that Rob Zombie shot it on location in Salem, which is not far from where I live. It's awesome. Coming in at number 17 is a movie I feel is an absolute must for this list. Insidious. This is the movie that started it all. Its own little franchise, and this first one is the best of the bunch, in my opinion anyway. It's another movie I find to be very rewatchable. I love the twists and turns and creepy moments in this one. Insidious is a fantastic horror film, and it's number 17 in my top 20. My number 16 pick is another one I initially thought would be higher on my list, but here it is. A Quiet Place. This movie has one of the most heroic moments in horror movie history, in my opinion. This one is also unique because it has very little dialogue, but you are still somehow drawn into the film. That's how you know it was well done. I cannot wait for the sequel because I absolutely love A Quiet Place. Coming in at number 15 is a movie I finally watched for the first time recently after hearing so many great things for so long. The Witch. I have to say, it lived up to the hype. This movie was incredible, and it really flew by. It's an hour and a half, give or take, but it felt so much shorter. I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just so invested in the characters and in the film that I couldn't even believe it when it was over. Literally, the credits were rolling and I was thinking, that's it? But not in a bad way. Just, I couldn't believe it was done. I really enjoyed this one, and I'm glad I finally decided to watch it. At number 14 is a movie I watched and reviewed for the 12 Days of Christmas last year, after once again hearing so many great things. It's Better Watch Out. Like The Witch, this one also lived up to the hype. It was awesome. It's like a horror movie version of Home Alone in a way. And as far as great Christmas horror movies go, this one would be close to the top of that list. But on this list, it's number 14. My number 13 pick is what, for a long time, I called my favorite horror film from last year. It's 3 from Hell. It's the second Rob Zombie film to make this list, but not the last. I loved this movie. It was a great, fitting end, maybe, to the Firefly trilogy, and it makes me want to see more. So I hope it's not actually the end of the Firefly clan. This movie was fantastic. It got some hate, but I don't understand it. I loved 3 from Hell, and it's my number 13 in my top 20. My number 12 seems to be a favorite among many when it comes to horror films from the last decade, and I can definitely see why. It's Leprechaun Returns. I mentioned when I reviewed this one during the Slashback Challenge that this is how modern-day horror films should be made. It maintains that nostalgic charm of older horror films while revitalizing this franchise for a modern generation. I absolutely loved it, and most of you seem to love it too, for good reason. Leprechaun Returns is number 12 in my top 20. Coming in at number 11 is The Strangers Pray at Night. This is, of course, the sequel to The Strangers, and I actually prefer this one to the original. This one definitely feels more like a slasher film, while the first one is more of a simple home invasion film. Not only that, but The Strangers Pray at Night has an amazing soundtrack. We're into the top 10 now with what might be the funniest horror film of all time. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Now this is what you call a reverse slasher film. It's absolutely hilarious, and I cannot recommend this one enough. Coming in at number 9 is Victor Crowley, which happens to be my favorite sequel in the Hatchet franchise. Now, I could have gone with Hatchet 2, Hatchet 3, or this one, since all of the Hatchet sequels were released between 2010 and 2019. But, as I just said, this is my favorite of the sequels, so I really did not need to think about it. I love the plain setting, I love the kills, I love the characters, and I cannot wait for the next part in the Hatchet series. My number 8 pick shares something significant with the Hatchet films. The writer and director, Adam Green. It's Frozen. I talk about this one quite substantially in my top 20 favorite killer animal films video, but in this video I will say Frozen is one of the most intense horror films I've ever seen. Here at number 7 is a movie that was probably my favorite horror film of the decade for a while, The Cabin in the Woods. Seeing this movie was one of my favorite movie-going experiences ever. It's pretty much a horror fan's dream, in my opinion. It has everything. But it's now at number 7, because there are 6 horror films I actually prefer more. And at number 6 is Scream 4. This was another absolute must for this list, because Scream is one of my favorite slasher franchises. And Scream 4 is the only sequel in the series to be released during this time frame, 2010 through 2019, which is why it's the one you see here. We've reached the top 5, and coming in at number 5 is one I'm sure will appear on most of your lists. Halloween 2018. It's the Halloween film that revitalized the franchise. It did something that Halloween Resurrection failed to do years ago. It got me excited for future Halloween sequels. I loved this one, and I cannot wait for Halloween Kills later this year. My number 4 is especially based on my own personal opinion. It's Phantasm Ravager. Now, I say that because I know this one doesn't have a lot of fans, but Phantasm is probably my favorite franchise overall, so I love it. I have to admit, when I first watched it, I was slightly disappointed. Not as much as other people when they first watched it, but as time went on and I watched it again and again, I've grown to love this one almost as much as the first 4. So, for me, Phantasm Ravager is number 4 in my top 20. Coming in at number 3 is a movie I watched for the first time last year, thanks to my buddies Jason and Brad. It's Rob Zombie's 31. I have praised this movie since I saw it. I don't understand the hate. I never, ever will on this one. Rob Zombie gets so much criticism, and I get it sometimes. I really do. He's not for everyone. But this is another one of those horror films that I consider to be a horror fan's dream. It's a masterpiece in its own way, and it deserves that credit. I love 31, and it's my 3rd favorite horror film of the last decade. Speaking of masterpieces, here's one right here. This is probably the greatest horror film made in the last decade. Maybe the greatest horror film made in the last 20 years. Seriously, it's Midsommar. There is so much I could say about this one, but I don't even want to bother getting into it. All I can say is watch it. Don't let the long runtime put you off, because that's what took me so long to see it. You know, I saw that it has a 2-hour and 27-minute runtime, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to hold off. But I wish I hadn't, because this one blew me away. It truly is a masterpiece and needs to be seen by everyone. Maybe you won't love it as much as I have, and that's fine, but it still needs to be seen. And even though I think it's the greatest horror film possibly made in the last 20 years, and especially made in the last 10 years, it's not necessarily my number 1 favorite. That's the thing with these lists. We're not counting down what we consider to be the greatest films of all time. We're counting down our personal favorites. And for me, Midsommar is number 2. But my number 1 favorite horror film of 2010 through 2019 is Curse of Chucky. It's another perfect example of a modern-day horror sequel revitalizing a slasher franchise. Curse of Chucky is my favorite Child's Play film, and it also has my favorite final girl of all time. I love the look of Chucky in this one, the setting is phenomenal, and the kills are awesome. Curse of Chucky is one of my favorite horror films of the last 20 years, and it is my number 1 favorite horror film of the last 10. Well, there you have it, guys. My top 20 for 2020 of my top 20 favorite 2010 through 2019 horror films. What do you think? Comment below and let me know. Also, be sure to check out Jason's ranking, and if you feel up to it, feel free to participate yourself. We'd love to see your top 20 of the last 10 years. Thanks for watching, guys. Be kind, subscribe.